Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about one of the reasons that I am a big fan of high set training with fairly low reps. In the case of today, here I'm demonstrating from some of my former videos, like my dynamic effort press stuff, overhead press and dynamic effort sumo deadlift. And you guys will notice on those days I actually did 12 sets of each of those that day, right? In the 1 to 2 rep range with sub-maximal weight. So the question becomes, why? Why do that on certain lifts? Well, dynamic effort has its own things going on, but the why comes down to increasing your maxes. If you have exercises that you are trying to increase your 1 rep max on, and keep in mind, guys, 1 rep maxes do make you stronger. Training heavy makes you stronger, and that does carry over to your volume work. In other words, if you get stronger on a deadlift or an overhead press, all the muscles involved do get stronger, and that will carry over to a lot of your other multi-joint exercises that you're doing for volume. So size and strength, all of it just feeds into each other, and you can't really separate them. You can bias your training slightly towards one or the other, and that's partially what we're going to talk about here, but they're not completely separatable, but they feed into each other. And so actually, if you're just trying to maximize both concurrently, you're usually going to get the best results because, again, a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle, and conversely, a stronger muscle is a bigger muscle. So it works both directions. But here's the thing that you have to remember. When it comes to getting strong at a single or hitting a max, the first rep that you do on every set with that exercise is really the only one that matters. The first rep is all that matters. I don't care whether you're doing 2 rep sets, 5 rep sets, 10 rep sets. The first rep is the one that matters most. That is the one that carries over to the skill of hitting a 1 rep max. Now, we can argue that in some cases, EMG showed best muscle fiber recruitment on the second rep, particularly with a relatively heavy weight, right? Once we're inside the threshold to where you can recruit maximum fibers. But if you want to get good at hitting a max, you have to do a lot of first reps. So the argument could be made that training very low reps on the exercises that you're ever going to max on, and that's the difference here, right? People understand that. I'm not saying for every exercise, but I'm saying for the ones that you might want to hit a max on, even if they're exercises with a relatively large amount of fatigue versus stimulus, like the deadlift, you're getting practice in by doing more sets with the lower reps. That gives you an enormous amount of practice. And people say, well, what do you mean? Well, it helps you with your setup. It helps you with your mechanics, everything else. Because when you go to hit a max, you're going to have to walk up and do the first rep, right? Whether it's a powerlifting meet, a strength lifting meet, any of that, you're going to have to walk up and do a single. Well, you can't perfectly replicate every rep in a set. And a lot of people say, well, you sometimes look like you do. It sometimes looks like a machine. I've had people say that over the years. And in some cases, it does appear that way. But it really isn't. It really isn't. There's going to be slight variations. Now, that also means that if you want to get strong and have good technique, you should be resetting between every single rep, is what you guys see me do. I reset at the top of each squat. I reset on every deadlift. Every bench press, we get to the top, we let it resettle, even if we're doing rep work, because I am trying to replicate a single again. But that first rep is the one that the biomechanics are going to ingrain on. What you do on that one, even if you do everything different on the subsequent reps, you're still ingraining that the first rep is supposed to use a certain movement pattern. Your hips are going to be in a certain position. Your elbows are going to be in a certain position. You're going to do things that way. And so it's going to transfer. It's going to carry over. Also, really high set training, one of the things I've always noticed, like, well, I don't care whether it's a deficit deadlift or a sumo deadlift or anything that you're doing, the more sets that you do, the more you can assess how things like foot placement, toe angle, hand placement, all these different little things, you can start quickly assessing which ones make the weight feel the lightest, which ones allow you to be the strongest. It lets you practice finding your perfect leverages for a first rep. You get more practice setting up. You get more practice setting up, walking into position, unracking a weight, doing whatever you need to do, learning to get a bar settled in better. All these different little bitty things, you get more and more practice with a lot more first reps in addition to that, but it does let you find positions better, because if you do 10 sets with a weight that's it's manageable or moderately heavy weight, or 12 sets or anything extreme like that, what happens? You recover enough set to set that early through the sets, midway through, you're really getting a feel for it and you're not totally fatigued yet. So you're not getting the accumulation of fatigue to where the weight's unmanageable that early on, to where that's going to cause fatigue. So any changes that you feel from set to set is going to be based on more efficient levers. It allows you to find your ideal levers as far as bar pass, foot position, hand position, all these different things. It lets you experiment. If I place my feet 1 inch different, does it feel heavier or lighter pulling the first couple inches off the floor on a deadlift? If I move my hands half an inch over this way, does my whatever press, an overhead press, a bench press, whatever, does it feel lighter? Does it move faster? When you're doing multiple sets back to back to back like that, it lets you assess that better. It lets you fine tune those things and find your perfect levers. And even on an accessory type move, and even if you did it on deficit deadlifts, it will carry over, because whatever you give you the most strength at the bottom of a deficit deadlift is definitely going to give you a hell of a lot more strength when you go to a conventional deadlift. Because that's also the weak link there. It's letting you get the most power and most leverage through the weakest part of the lift. It's helping you to find it. So there's something to be said for that. Now, a lot of people would say, well, does this mean that you don't necessarily need to do a lot of volume on those? Don't you need volume for growth? And I'm not going to say that volume is not useful. You guys see me doing a lot of rep work. I do even some really, really high rep stuff for some of my really small accessory movements, right? Face pulls, abs, but I'm even doing tens and things for triceps. You guys are seeing me do them. Well, that's the problem. You have some of these big movements you really need to be focused on. Can I maximize my strength on them? Some of them are not always the best exercises for inducing maximum hypertrophy, because if you induce too much fatigue, you struggle to recover. So take something like a deadlift. That's a perfect example of an exercise that benefits tremendously from doing high volumes of training with really low reps, but keeping them to a point that you can recover from, because it has a high fatigue to stimulus ratio. It will allow you to get a lot stronger, and it will have a certain amount of hypertrophic benefit. But then I would say with something like a deadlift, come behind and take your various weak points and do higher volume stuff. If you feel like your hamstrings are limiting your deadlift, you don't have to do a deadlift to bring your hamstrings up. Then do a bunch of glute ham raises, where you can induce larger amounts of fatigue with more volume without it impacting your recovery as much. This isn't an either or. It is a case of some of these big lifts are more suited to training really, really heavy and not necessarily suited to high volumes of training. That's why we have accessory movements. That's why they're useful. That's why they work. Your primary movements versus an accessory. And an accessory movement, again, is usually something that has a very low amount of systematic fatigue that it accumulates. Right? You can do a lot of glute ham raises and still recover. You can do a lot of tricep extensions, as long as you're using a variation of a tricep extension that doesn't cause connective tissue inflammation. All right? You can recover from a lot of tricep work. Recover from a lot of delt work. You can pick variations of those that don't create large amounts of systematic fatigue. Again, as long as they're not a movement pattern that causes connective tissue inflammation, and a lot do. You got to be careful of that with small movements. But they will let you get in a lot of volume to where then you can throw all those volume and reps at your weak points, right? Because as long as the weak points are growing, everything else involved is going to continue to grow as you just get stronger on big lifts. So the point I'm trying to make here is that a lot of these bigger exercises, they really are suited if you want to get really, really strong at them, to just sticking to low reps. They really are. And then again, you use that to build skills. You can build size, you build strength, all that with it. And then, come along behind and train the smaller stuff as necessary on a case-by-case basis, depending on what your weak points are. And that usually works a lot better. So it's something I've learned over the years. I've experimented with back and forth, and I generally find it to be true. Observing myself, observing various athletes, everything else, it really is the way to go. So there is something to be said for really high set training with low reps on exercises that you actually really and truly are trying to develop a stronger max on, for those reasons, just all the practice and everything else. And again, you can get your extra training volume for anything that needs the extra bump from other stuff. And people always need to remember that, because everything that's not the weak link will continue to grow quite well off of even the high set training on most of these big exercises. They really will. As long as you're shoring it up with the weak links with more volume for those, everything will continue to grow just fine. It's been my observations over the years. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.